All right, we're doing this. Okay, everyone. So I hope that on your way back in, you got a program for the videos that are going to be screened again on sort of 2 sets of loops after this. If you did not get that, then we'll set some stacks in the back by both doors. Another little note is that here I have the sign-up sheet for people that are going tomorrow to the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education, where we're going to have a hike and a panel discussion. Some people are going to meet there. You can Google it for the address because I don't know off the top of my head. But for those of you that want to meet here and get a ride, that's totally doable. But you also need other people to offer rides. And so if any of you are thinking about going, or you're excited about meeting new people and helping them, then please show up at 9:15 tomorrow morning. We'll have a van to drive people, but we need more space than just that van. So if you can offer a ride, I'm going to put this sign-up sheet by the door right here on this side of the auditorium. And so, without further ado, I'm going to invite Jacqueline, who's going to introduce the next panel.
Good evening and welcome back. We're about to begin our closing panel discussion, Engagement Curators. My name is Jacqueline Lang. I am a beginning graduate student here at Moore in the Social Engagement Program. I'm also a New York City public school teacher. And as an arts educator, I'm constantly interested in the hows and whys through which I endeavor to engage my students in the classroom. And I'm extremely excited to introduce the panel moderator, Maori Holmes. Ms. Holmes is uniquely qualified to lead these reflections, ranging in topics from how and why we curate and facilitate socially engaged art to how we participate within it. Maori Holmes is currently the Director of Public Engagement at the Institute for Contemporary Art here in Philadelphia, where through her leadership of this new department, she works to expand the ICA's reach and involvement with a wide stretch of diverse communities. She is also the founder of the upcoming Black Star Film Festival in Philadelphia, and has worked with and in organizations ranging from the Leeway Foundation to the University of Pennsylvania. She has been a filmmaker, a curator, a consultant, a lead facilitator of partnerships with a number of philanthropic and social justice groups. Mary has continuously embedded herself in the work of engaging with communities through the arts, and because of her across-the-board experience, is the best person we could hope for to lead us through these discussions. Please join me in welcoming Maori Holmes.
Thank you. That might be the sweetest introduction I've ever had. I'm excited to lead this panel today. We have a wonderful group of speakers here. As was mentioned, I am new to this work in a formal way, but I've been interested in audiences and how we work with them for a number of years, and so I'm excited to talk to these folks who've been doing it much longer. So I'd like to introduce our panel. I think I said, no, I did not set them in order, so I'm going to try to introduce them in order. Louise Martorano is Executive Director of RedLine Contemporary Art Center in Denver, which fosters education and engagement between artists and communities to create positive social change. Sean Kelley is Senior Vice President and Director of Interpretation and Public Programming at Eastern State Penitentiary here in Philadelphia, a site which is best known for its annual Halloween event, Terror Behind the Walls, but in recent years has expanded to highlight issues of mass incarceration. Lucía Sanromán is Director of Visual Arts at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. She spent the last few years developing collaborative projects in the US and Mexico with artists and others interested in social engagement and change. And next to me is Nato Thompson, Artistic Director at Creative Time. He is also a curator and writer. His book, Seeing Power, Art and Activism in the 21st Century, was published last year. So please join me in welcoming him. So I want to start off with an initial question that you all can answer and talk about your work and also, I think, an example of what you've done in the past, and this is a means of introduction. So I want to ask you, why is it important to you to do the work of curating social engagement, and how did you come to this work? And you can answer it, whoever feels led.
I came to the work because I was previously at a museum in Denver, and I felt like I was only seeing one person walk through the door, and I felt that where I was disassociated with what art could really do, and though I didn't have really a good sense of what that was, I saw the potential was great, and I didn't feel like I was connected the way I wanted to be. And so I was lucky to get a call saying that I needed to check out this place called RedLine, and they were kind of just forming their inaugural staff. And the director at that time was a community organizer and activist named PJ D'Amico, and it was there that art started to make sense to me. And I kind of forget the second question, but why engaging audiences?
Why is it important to you to do this work?
Well, yeah, I guess in some ways that is why it's important to me, because it allows you to meet people that you'll be in the same room together with people that you wouldn't always be in the same room together with, based on how social structures work. And so I feel like art really has allowed me to be in conversations across every topic, and has allowed me to understand change in a new way, and doesn't necessarily have limitations around it. So, I felt that every person that walks through the door of RedLine is an important relationship that I need to have, regardless of what is on the agenda or what's on the time, and to make time for that and to continue that relationship has been the most rewarding and important part of being the director of a contemporary art space.
Let's go.
I feel like a fraud being here. I said this to a couple of you already, but I don't call myself a curator. I don't consider myself a curator particularly. That said, we've had 140 artist installations at Eastern State since I started there in 1995, and I'm the one who works with them. I don't see working with artists as being distinct from anything else that we do. I love working with artists, but I love working with exhibit designers as well. And I'm often asked, especially in environments like this, about the distinction between the one program and the other, and I don't increasingly find it even all that interesting to separate the two. We work with artists all the time because they are really good at reaching our visitors. And everyone heard me speak last night at Eastern State. It's always awkward to talk about. I never know how to say this stuff, so I'm just saying it. So I also feel like there's a secret handshake language of people who do this kind of work that I don't have, so I'm going to blunder my way through this, but if I don't, just, bear with me. But our audience is mostly white. We're not happy about that, and we're working to make the experience of being at our site meaningful to all Americans, especially those who are so heavily impacted by mass incarceration. That said, our audience is also mostly tourists. So what we get are literally, over 1,000 white middle-class tourists a day walking through the site on vacation, and trying to find a way to talk to that audience about poverty and talk to that audience about race. It's not easy. We've struggled for years to find our voice, and artists working with us got it much sooner than we did. So I look back at our installations we did, like Troy Richards' piece, Nick Casaway's piece called Portraits of Inmates in the Death Row Population. He made that piece for us in 2003, and it was wonderfully evocative to our visitors, asking questions about the morality of executing someone for something they did when they were a child. So we had artists for 15 years. We had artists on the property working with us who were finding ways to talk to our audience when we either weren't trying hard enough or we were failing. It was sort of a combination of the two. I feel like recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, we have found our own voice, but now we're just in the habit. It's like a virus. That's why we do it.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Paul, Daniel, and Moore, and Mural Arts. I would say that my interest in social engagement comes from the fact that I started curating late. In other words, I was an artist first and then did other things and started curating, and very quickly started curating for an American institution at the border in San Diego, California, at the border. I am a Mexican, I lived in Tijuana, and I very quickly started to see the limitations of the approach to how to include communities of color, and Mexican communities in particular in that context. So the notion of doing an engaged practice, we can just later maybe take a pause to understand what the word engagement actually means or doesn't mean and so on, really comes from a desire to develop different types of methodologies to work with artists, but also to reconceive audiences. I felt that the mechanism, or let's say the apparatus, or the thing that this museum was, where I was working at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, literally prevented it from actually having audiences that became involved in different ways, much more constituencies, and that was a much more authentic way of relating to what they needed. And that wasn't a factor of having better artists that knew how to do engagement, and it wasn't a factor of the institution itself in terms of quality. It's a factor of the kind of thing a museum of contemporary, that particular museum of contemporary art was, and what its goals were, how it collected, and why it collected. I actually started working at that museum because it said that it collected artists from Mexico and Latino artists, and because it said in its mandate, it's the only museum in the United States that actually says this out loud, that its audiences are American, Latino, and Mexican. But in practice, when you have a board of directors and a collecting practice that is directed in a certain way, it is actually creating a system that prioritizes a certain type of audience because of the economic makeup of the board. And so the only way I could figure out a way, I literally kind of took the job and did the job and lived in Tijuana and crossed the border every day as a strategy to maintain a relationship to a community that I was meant to represent, with all the dangers that that entails when you represent an identity, a whole group of people for an institution. But in fact, I found that I couldn't actually do the kind of work I wanted to do, which I didn't really know what it was very well. I knew some models in the world. We had insight took place in the border Tijuana San Diego over many years. And we had models from Creative Time, and we had models from Europe. But I knew that I couldn't do those at that institution. I knew I couldn't work with certain types of artists I wanted to work with. And I knew that I couldn't dislodge the position of these minority audiences in terms of how they are addressed by the institution, but also how they are positioned in the whole cycle of fundraising through grants. So why I started to work towards this kind of much more engaged practice was as a reaction to that.
So interesting to hear. It's great. So not to go too long, but certainly it's interesting because when I first, I feel like I've always been in the arts. My dad was this weird painter, filmmaker man, and we kind of traveled around with him. I always thought art was just a way you lived your life. I didn't know it was something you did for a long time. I just thought, like arty. So just to say, I kind of grew up arty. And like when I was in junior high school, my brother and I lived in the Cal Arts dorms. And our favorite thing to do all day long was to go to the naked pool and stare at people. But I thought that was art, just to say. When I went to Berkeley in undergrad, I got much more into kind of radical revolutionary politics. But I kind of just thought them as different kind of spheres. And I only say this as a preface because I've always kind of had this desire to have my cake and eat it too. The cake being art, and I guess the eat it too being kind of social justice. So I kind of just wanted all of it in one world for my own edification. Maybe it's the Emmett Goldman dictum, if I can't dance at your revolution, I don't want it. I want to I was a raver for a brief amount of time, so I kind of was into dancing during Revolution. That said, over the years, I kind of had an interest in just people that kind of have that spirit about them in art practice, and also in activist practice. That is to say, a kind of joyous, aesthetic ebullience about this. And when I got a job, I was doing this stuff really poorly for a long time before I got an official job at Mass Mocha in 2001. But I was very concerned that, to go to your kind of issues in the institutions, that there was my private kind of artistic desires, and then there was this giant evil contemporary art world that would never let me do this, because they always wanted to do do all these famous art forum artist shows all the time, and that's all they wanted to do. And so what I found, I did this show, The Interventionists, in 2004, and it did really well, in so much as the audiences got it, and all these kind of worries I had about that the institutions hated this didn't happen in some ways. And I saw this possibility that that kind of political art practice could exist. Now, it's different because when we talk about engagement, that's almost been an evolution, because before it was much more about interventions and kind of yes-men prankstery stuff. But I was always kind of interested in this work, and just a shout out to a lot of Chicago peeps who are also coming to Philly. Yes. But I was deeply influenced by the space contemporary services, mess hall. It was always kind of very influenced by kind of social practice thing coming out of Europe, but also had a lot of activists interfacing with it. So a lot of these questions were in the air in Chicago in 1999, 2000, and so that really inspired me as a kind of community to keep evolving. Lately, let's shift forward. I've been in Creative Time a bit, and this kind of more socially engaged art thing is in the air. It's in institutions, it's in contemporary art institutions, it's in educational institutions, it's in foundations, and much more. And I would say things have really progressed. The conversation around race is very much on the table now. The conversation around the complexities of this field are here in this room. But I think it's been a really helpful, deeply powerful movement in terms of it's also shaping institutions. New jobs are emerging. Like engagement curators, education departments getting more validity. I've seen the field shifting, and also even with institutions like the Guggenheim or the Whitney, the conversation around self-consciousness around race, about methodologies to reach out to people, it's out there in a profound way that even 5 years ago it wasn't on the table. So I see the field shifting so dramatically, and just to say, I find it deeply inspiring. And also that I don't want to gloss over it, that every time a new horizon emerges, we find new challenges as a community. But the community has grown. And to talk about space and power and equity in the same conversation around art, that's progress. And I, to go to kind of Risa's questions, I was thinking 5 years ago, we wouldn't be having those conversations in a big room. So I think, to me, the force and the complexity of the questions, and also making structural changes, that's what drives it. That we have a big, let's face it. We got the DNC coming, we got Trump, we got some real battles on our hands here. So I'm glad that we're making progress, but we're fucked if we don't make bigger progress.
Thank you. Can each of you share an example of ethical conflict or tension that you've had in your work? And I wanted to sort of complicate that question by asking, when is good intention not enough? Because we assume that you're, facilitating these projects and the artists have good intention, but what are some of the ethical things that come up?
To go in order. I've thought a lot about this question. I feel like the ethical challenge that I constantly have is, well, I'm going to pull an example from a specific program. So RedLine has a program called Reach Studio, and this is really in response to RedLine sitting in an area of Denver that is surrounded by human service providers with people experiencing homelessness and drug addiction and etc. So we created a dedicated community studio so folks could come in and make work and be a community within that space and not necessarily think about those aspects of survival that they may experience or just be in the space to make work, and that's what they identified with each other. And basically the program has evolved, and the folks who came to Reach Studio first now are advocates and do the recruitment, and they've taken a lot of ownership, and they have relanguaged how we speak about the program and how they speak about each other. When the program was first started, it was started under the verbiage and language that these folks were homeless, and the program was set up to help them. And through many dialogues, now 8 years of ongoing dialogues with this core group of artists that keeps coming every single Tuesday, they have redefined themselves in a language that is more humanizing. However, and this is where I am going to commit nonprofit suicide, but when but when we go to but when we go to apply for grants to support this program that provides this space consistently, and materials and exhibition opportunities and opportunities for these artists to make sales and essentially go beyond their title of homelessness, we have to return to that language 8 years ago in order for funders to understand what we're saying. And I feel like it's at that moment that I feel like we have moved 8 years forward, and I have to go now 8 years back in the same moment. And so, we arrived at these dialogues with the participants so thoughtfully. They have come up with all the words that they feel most comfortable with. However, no one knows what we're talking about unless we use the word homelessness. And homelessness is not a name. And the participants are Risa, Rose, Rivero, Gonzo, who's the mayor of 5 Points, and every single one that walks around RedLine has this social label of homelessness, but we know all of their names, and that's what we call them. But when we go for funding, we have to revert. And so that's my ongoing frustration.
I have a quick question for you. Daniel told me to be an engaged moderator. And this is something that I've encountered also with funding, but I've taken, depending on the funder and the relationship that I have, I'm wondering, have you considered or been able to or feel comfortable educating the funder? Like using the application to use the new language and then a description that they would understand, or even having a side meeting, or I'm just curious what that has been like.
So, I was talking with my friend Tatiana about this from the Hemera Foundation, and she was one of those funders that I could use more humanizing language with and have the dialogue with. And so she and, I think the Bumpy Stanton Foundation, now run by Gary Sawyer, who, of course, used to be here in Philly, and we have benefited so much in Denver from these two arriving, because we can start to reshape the language that is used. So yes, but prior to their arrival, no. It was pretty much, it would be, arts is not really funded well by foundations, and so you're constantly throwing yourself into other categories. What I like about art is it can traverse every category, so fine, we'll show up, to get the work done. But yeah, it has been awkward, to say the least. Yeah.
I don't know where to start. Everything that we do has an ethical, could be questioned ethically. I go to other prison museums, I look at other sites of detention, and just the mere fact of opening the doors, right off the bat, it's a troubled area. I'm actually surprised we don't get called on some of our ethical choices more often. 10 years ago, that was sort of the bulk of what troubled me, was that sort of energy. As we've evolved more into this world of talking about mass incarceration and trying to address these deeper issues, it's got way more complicated for us. Lauren Zala is here, Director of Education. Lauren spent a year getting ready to hire men and women who had recently been incarcerated to compare our building to a modern prison. And when you first hear that, you think, that sounds really great. You're going to provide jobs, and you're going to provide voices. Whose voices are we going to elevate? We're going to actually go and find people who are good tour guides and can say firsthand, this is the difference between a punishment cell in the 1950s and a punishment cell in prison today, because I've lived in one. But the more that you get closer to that idea, the scarier it gets of, are you sensationalizing this experience? Are you exploiting this person? This is a group of people who, as well know, struggle to find work. And so it's like, the good news is we're going to give you a job, pay you well, treat you well, we hope. Bad news is we're going to ask you to talk about a traumatic, painful, humiliating experience all day long to a bunch of white tourists on vacation. Like again and again, just keep doing it. And Lauren, with our advisors, and I spent a long time trying to figure out the ethics behind all of this. And we are, I would say, 85% sure we did the right thing. Lauren created essentially a 3-month program, 2 days a week for 3 months, for 4 people, all of whom at the end said they had a great experience, but it was really difficult. And Lauren has since hired one of the men on that program to be a tour guide like any other tour guide. So he's not required to talk about his experience in prison, although he's certainly welcome to. We would never tell anyone they're not, and hide that, but he may or may not. I still struggle with wanting to trot him out. I know that's intentionally obnoxious language, but it's the way I feel looking back on the way that I'm always wanting to say, hey, come to this board meeting, hey, come to this conference, when it seems that what he really wants to do is to just become a tour guide, like any other tour guide, and of course that's his prerogative, and it's just very difficult because he isn't, in my mind, like any other tour guide. He's a really special person and has this enormous, powerful perspective on what we're doing that none of the rest of us have. I'm really proud, though, to say that that project has not just brought someone onto our staff with first-hand experience inside the prison, but also to our board of directors. Our board has been terrific throughout this entire process. Well, what I'm not saying is that all of this is paid for in part by a haunted house. And so that is something that I have such mixed feelings about. I could talk about this for hours. But among the things that the haunted house does is not just provide enormous sums of unrestricted money to our bottom line. Our building has been abandoned for 2 generations. I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar, many millions of dollars. We've raised $10 million today. We need like another 30. And the haunted house money is the lifeblood of the organization. 60% of our earned revenue comes from this haunted house. It's like it's everything. So closing the haunted house would mean laying off most of the staff. Not you, Lauren. You're cool, but most. So the haunted house is everything. It's also it provides. Brings a lot of people to the organization. We have a very good crossover rate of convincing people who become interested in us because of the haunted house to come back during the day. It's a more racially diverse audience than our daytime audience. It's a younger audience and it's a more regional audience. And we do everything we can do to get that audience to come back. We're confident that if we canceled it, it would actually hurt our attendance and it would hurt our racial and generationally and economically diverse aspects of our audience. That said, the day that I sit here and say there's no mission price that we're paying by turning our site into an entertainment venue is the day that we've given up on taking our mission seriously. There is. We have our group of advisors who do advocacy work. Actually came through the show with me last year, and they were, I think it's fair to say that they were surprised by how innocuous it is, that it doesn't play on cliches about scary people in prisons. To the small degree that it did, they gave us feedback of that, and we've changed that part of the show. But it was very, very minor changes that we had for their advice. That said, we turned the building into an entertainment venue, and it is not the best way to raise money. And so that is that. I'm going to make one more quick plug, if you don't mind. We would have had a real question if as we began going into asking our audience to consider, our daytime audience, to talk about race, talk about their own personal experiences. Our audience, we do surveys. It's like 70% of them believe they have no connection to the criminal justice system at all. They do, they just don't know it. Don't believe they do. As we've begun to push them a little bit more, and actually can't really push, but you can intrigue them to have these conversations, and we're getting better and better at it every year. Had our attendance begun to drop, we would have had a real question there. And it's something that I feel I see other arts organizations struggling with this the way that we've struggled with it, but I just want to make an appeal that getting a big audience is nothing to be embarrassed by. And we are constantly saying, can we go bigger? I always talk about this image of a wedge, and you can work on the narrow end of the wedge, which is a handful of your audience members being deeply, deeply impacted, or there's the wide end of the wedge, which is everybody. And we became really clear when we decided we needed to be talking more explicitly, especially about race, that we wanted to go as wide on that wedge as we could. We wanted to be in the center of every visitor's experience. And it can be done. So far anyway, our attendance is up like 14% right now over the last year, so we're doing well with it. But those ethical questions, I think that's an ethical question that we were able to duck. But more than 5 years ago, we would have never gone any of this. We would have feared that. Yes.
Lucía, just a reminder, the question is if you could describe an ethical conflict or tension in your work, and when is good intention not enough?
Well, good intention is never enough. Never enough in the sense that I feel good intentions, are a good start, I guess. But I would say that I'm constantly kind of productive tension, or the notion of inhabiting a contradiction that operates in my work all the time. It's not just that I see what I do personally as a curator that goes in and out of the art world, contemporary art world, as a hinge between different, oftentimes cultural but also economic and racial groups. When it's working well, it's literally inhabiting various worlds and uniting them, operating as a kind of, let's say, venue for different kinds of interactions and even economic interactions. But more importantly, I am very kind of structured in the way I think about stuff. So I'm constantly thinking of how to use one system, one kind of platform, an institutional platform, to serve another end. So it's not that the projects, I try very hard to think of the power dynamics that are created, but necessarily, oftentimes, having a kind of aesthetic, artistic end to projects and having a social dynamic or a social aim oftentimes brings up ethical questions simply because of these different languages that are operating. So what I mean, for example, we did a project over 3 years with Shari Hirsch here at the Mural Arts project. I have the little book here with cohabitation strategies. This is what we actually gave back to the foundation after the whole thing, to the few, which thankfully, I'm very grateful they funded it. The project was these 4 foreign, 2 Mexican, 2 Italian artists, urban planners, sort of social critiques coming to Philadelphia over the course of a year, really, very quick succession, never living here, to do a kind of what is called an action research project in South Philadelphia. Now, South Philadelphia, the area that we ended up working in, is a poor area of the city. It's an area that is mostly immigrant communities, which actually work well in terms of our own makeup as a group of producers and creators. But there is definitely that sort of question whether this kind of, it wasn't very much, I wouldn't call it a parachuting in and out of a condition, because the whole project was set up as a kind of institutional critique to mural arts to offer new ways to address their impact in a community long term, particularly around the issue of gentrification. So it was always conceived as a basis of something, but it certainly, all these ethical questions simply started to appear right away. And I have to speak and thank Shari, because Shari was always the first person to say, I think this is not right, I think that this is not being looked at correctly in terms of the race relations that are being set up. I don't think, so we argued a lot over the course of the project. We argued internally amongst the artists, ourselves, etc., because we felt very strongly that whatever was being created, which was quite an abstract sort of set of things, essentially a guidebook of the area, was also going to be able to help mural arts think about its position in this city, in that specific area for the future. So as a first stage, it was very important that everything be considered carefully. But the ethics of the project were
constantly shifting. And I couldn't tell you today, even though I'm very proud of the project, and I think it's a very useful project, I couldn't tell you today if everything we did was ethical in that kind of moralistic way. I can tell you that there is always a slippage. And sometimes I think that that is actually a marker of a good project. In other words, that it doesn't actually hit the register like a good school child in a Catholic school would, right? But that it touches on so many different things that it actually articulates and this makes visible for us the complexities of a system such as this one. Thank you.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like when we talk about, this is what's weird. You know, it's like social change, that word. Like, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Are we, any of us actually being useful? Like, I mean, I feel like in some ways the question is like, I kind of always want to have like revolution on the table or something. Because in some ways it's hard. I have a deep, lately I'm having this like deep existential questions around social justice, which is like, we're just not moving fast enough. Yeah, maybe it is my kid. Or maybe it's Trump. Maybe it's the Trump kid combo. But I just mean in so much as, you know, we did this project in Weeksville. It's a place in Bed-Stuy. We partnered with this place, Weeksville Heritage Foundation, and it was a conversation, and I co-curated with this woman, Rashida Bumray, who's really amazing. And it was this long-term project that took place, you know, actually happened for just a month, but we've been working on it for 3 years. And it was around kind of sites of Black self-determination in this community, inspired by this organization called Weeksville, which was this intentional Black community from the early 19th century. And something that just hit me in the face, even harder than we did when we worked in New Orleans on this Paul Chan's project, Waiting for Godot, was only that the scale of the structural inequities we were confronting were so huge. And that you kind of felt almost ridiculous even having any words like social justice or social change emitted from this metaphoric work. Because this, you know, like gentrification. I mean, who the fuck is stopping that? You know? And like you go into neighborhoods and you almost feel like an asshole for saying there's hope. Because this city ain't gonna do it for you. It's totally corrupt here. And the developers run the show. So just to say in terms of ethics, I have these moments where I just think, who's kidding who? Sorry, that was dark. But I have that moment, you know, where you just feel like, and then also when you work with the community, they look at you like you're an idiot. They're like, hey, how's your project against gentrification going? You know? Like, people looking at you like, this has been gamed a long time. I'm just getting my money and getting out of here. You know, and that's just to say, that's one moment where I just have these like, real doubts about efficacy in general. Just deep, deep doubts. And also like thinking like, if we don't have a radical plan on the table, what are we talking about? Because capitalism's real, man. And people are going to jail and people are getting hurt. And it just seems like sometimes these sweet techniques may feel good, but I don't know, just doubts maybe. The other thing, developers, you know, in New York it's more pernicious than here, but it's certainly, like I said, feels corrupt. But, you know, Creative Time, when we work with public spaces, we work with developers a lot. And if we work with the city, currently I'm working with the city, and we're working with the Economic Development Corporation. So just to say, we're working with developers constantly. We have developers on our board. And it's not that I'm kind of a Machiavellian, so I'll take the money and I've got to do what I got to do. But I'm not unaware of the complexities around the production of space and privatization that are at work with public art. You know, and I think someone owns almost every inch of every city, and it's so rarely the people that you're working with private interests all the time. And those contradictions haunt me constantly. It's a necessary thing, and because what else, you know, is someone going to find a space free of capitalism to work in? I'm happy to go there. Another doubt, ethical concern, opacity. You know, I know that we always talk about, hey, when is a project ethical? But I've worked on so many projects where basically, I'll talk to you about this. Like, unless you walk through the entire project, you would never know if it was ethical or not. That it's really hard to know with social engaged art whether it was ethically produced. Who's gonna sit and watch an artist work for months and months and months? No art critic can. So we have to, I think in some ways, we have to admit there are things we cannot know about ethics. And we also, it seems very full of a kind of naive hubris to think you could read the ethics in things. Like that, like you're like, Rick Lowe. Rick Lowe is totally ethical. I love Rick Lowe. I think he is. But do we know? Do you know? You know what I mean? 16 years, a lot could have happened. Like, is Tanya Bergera and Immigrant Movement International ethical for 5 years? How do we know? And then also too, like when someone says, hey, you parachuted in, you got this social capital, you wrote off Tomas Hirschhorn, Tanya Bergera, Rick Lowe, whatever. Like, it's kind of true, And like with Creative Time, we get all kinds of social capital out of people's injustices. And just to be fair, all of us in this game we get a little skin in the game. Curators, artists, all of us get a little resume thing every time we work with community and it gets some limelight. I don't mean it's a problem, but it should raise a little doubt, because I'll tell you what, when we did that project with Paul Chan in New Orleans, he got famous. And we did that project with Karen Walker, she was already famous. She got more famous. Jay-Z and Beyonce came, man. Leo DiCaprio. Usher called Creative Time to go backstage. He wasn't even backstage. What's going on? But she got famous, right? And that's all cool, but then with Project New Orleans, a lot of the folks we worked with in the community, they didn't get famous. And they're suffering down there. So I think and not to say it's about guilt, but there's also some real shit going on. It's just fun.
So, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So the question is then, do we do this work at all? Or do we just take the money from foundations and from rich people, and we just essentially do the things that social organizations are not doing, or do more of that? I mean, I don't really like it. I want to work with that.
Do you want anybody to answer that?
I wonder about the same thing. I mean, not all that whole discussion, but I do wonder about the efficacy a lot, and I love your term, the hubristic naivete or whatever. Yeah, there are those days when I think yeah, we're gonna have mass incarceration, one artist installation at a time. That is a dark place to go. Because it's that's like 1 foot off the cliff of just being you know what, fuck it all. I'm just gonna, do another exhibit about a tunnel escape and politics or whatever. Or I can install laser tags inside the prison. Or make a haunted Halloween. I don't have a good answer for you, but I'm glad you asked me the question. We're actually going to get it tomorrow to try to study how historic sites who do this work, we don't even study them. Are we actually changing people? I mean, the bedrock message of our new programming, if I was going to sum it up in one phrase, would be that people in prison are basically, they're just people, Mostly they are mostly people who've grown up in poverty, and there are a whole lot of young men of color. But it's just a group of people, and so trying to build empathy and understand and trying to bridge that gap. So, yeah. So the question is, you hire a couple of fresh-faced young interns who go out there and they say to your visitors, hey, do you feel more empathetic now that you've seen this exhibit? And they're like, yes, I feel way more empathetic. And we go, wow, we rock it. And then you see that Trump wins the nomination. So we're going to try to see who's studying. There's this thing in historic sites and interpretation about debate versus dialogue. And we are very much on the dialogue side, so it means you have to make room for your visitors. Your visitors, their voice is very much part of the experience, the voice of the visitors. You want to make a nice, healthy space for that, and you have to listen to a lot of nonsense that you disagree with, and pretend that you respect it. But I wonder, like, does it actually work better? Like, where's the proof? And I'm raising a question I don't personally know the answer to. We've been gathering some documents downstairs. But I do hear you.
So I'm curious, thinking about this, and you bringing up proof, but also thinking about the Carol Walker project and whether or not, like, what does success mean? And so I'm curious, when you do these projects, any of you in your spaces or facilitate artists doing them, how do you know something when it has succeeded, and when you know it hasn't succeeded, if it is perceived as a failure, what do you do? You know, what is your next movement, or what has been your next movement? Because I think it's really hard to, particularly those of us who write grants, you have to think about impact, you have to think about a way to, you know, if you're Eastern State and you're saying we got this many visitors, right, that can be a success. But if you're doing something like an exhibition and it's, you know, public art project and it's neighbors on porches, you know what I mean? Like, how do you know when something has succeeded? And then when you know that it fails, because you know what that feels like, what is your next step?
So I have to share what felt like a success and then was so poignantly a failure was, so this actually image is when RedLine invited Augustina Woodgate to come out and do her hopscotch piece. And I don't know how many people are familiar with this piece, but you know, we brought it to Denver, and you know, we collaborated with Augustina to install this hopscotch in 7 different communities around Denver. And you know, I think the piece that we added, kind of the social fabric that we added to the project, was that every installation was in a different community that had kind of a different economic label on it, so to speak, or you know, a blanket that, you know, said low income, et cetera, under-resourced. And so the idea was to kind of create equity through this game, so that those who were in communities that were literally blockaded by highways and didn't have good access to any of the resources, whether it be transportation or food or any of those, that we would create this piece that was going to be in all of the neighborhoods, in all their different socioeconomic moments, so that when people traveled, they would recognize that it was in their neighborhood too, and it became a point of conversation, and it was, you know, it was a very kind of a viral phenomenon that we got a lot of great press, and it really created these moments in each of these neighborhoods where community came together. We partnered with all the libraries, and we experienced many communities in a very condensed time, and got to hear about, you know, through dialogue, you know, what they were dealing with in their, whether it be cut off or very resource space. The moment of failure was when I was going back with Augustina one time to photograph the installation, and I was, we were in this area of Denver called Global, and you know, Denver is experiencing 4,000 new visitors, our new residents a week. It's crazy what's going on with the neighborhood that RedLine exists in. You know, gentrification is definitely taking hold. It's displacing just tons and tons of people who are original residents to the neighborhood, historically African American and also Jewish. And yeah, just rapid displacement. And this one community is, because of like a I-70 reroute, because of growth, is going to be completely destroyed. And so, you know, I was just there being pretty excited that we were, you know, culminating this project with photographs, and I was standing up on kind of a, you know, it was just kind of a cement, you know, I don't know, block to get a better view of the piece. And this Latino family came driving in the car, because we were standing right outside the library, and they're like, "Are you taking our library away?" And I was like, shit. I celebrated hopscotch and jumping, and here, like, this person, and how this had this like wonderful community moment, and we had ice cream, but this is truly what I represent in this neighborhood, and that it was just crushing, and it made me feel like the most ineffective, non-impactful human. And so, then I guess what I did on the other side of that failure was get really involved with the rerouting of the I-70, highway in relationship to local Elyria Swansea neighborhoods. So,
One time we had this project. Okay, this is the worst part. So there needs to be a catalog of the worst socially engaged art, because it would be so enjoyable to read. We did this project a long time ago. Daniel, I don't know if you were part of it. I don't even know. Remember we did that real estate team? Lori Jo, anyways, a little gossip. But this project is so bad. So we were basically critiquing gentrification, and so this is like 2000 or something, in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. And so we set up a fake real estate company that was going to sell the gallery to real estate speculators. And so we chopped up the gallery, we talked about how it would be like 5 loftominiums, and there'd be parking and all this kind of stuff. And then Lori Jo Reynolds, who's this artist, was the real estate person, and we had this like interface of a computer. Anyways, so all these people were like, we put a for sale sign in front of the gallery, and then, so these people are looking for homes. We'll be like, oh, you're selling this place? Can I come in? Yeah, come on in. And then she'd kind of give them this weird performative speech about gentrification while we're selling the place. And then we had a round table at some point where we talked to the community, and we like revealed that it was all an art project. And it was all these first-time home buyers. They were like, I only get 1 day off a week. Why are you wasting my time critiquing me, essentially? And we were like, the audience for this project is this speculative real estate market. Whoever they were never came by. Just to say, totally off the mark. Worst art project of all time. That's an obvious failure. In fact, it was so enjoyably horrible, with all these people just ridiculing us for wasting their time. God, artists are so stupid. But in a different kind of sense, one of the things that's a weird failure, at least that with Curators, which is just a different kind of organization than other organizations, for whatever reason, sometimes my successes are like, and I don't mean like this is the most ridiculous thing, but like Kara Walker was a hugely popular project, right? Like that was a really popular project. But sometimes it becomes so popular you start like turning on them. Because I just feel like that Weeksville project I mentioned, not popular. We had literally 3,800 people come. And we spent as much as we did on Kara Walker with all the social engaged art stuff. Nobody came. Press didn't care.
Well, 3,800 people came.
3,800 people came.
So why is that a failure?
Well, no, that's what I mean to say. To me, it's my favorite art project I've ever worked on, right? And it, like the meaning of it, the strategies, but it really, in terms of scale, it totally did not. That is not a lot of people from New York City. That's not a lot of people. Whereas 160,000 came to Kara Walker, and of course, for an organization, you get them the board, and everyone's like, Kara Walker. That's what we got to do. That's a success, right? Like, look at those numbers. That's it. Look at Weeksville.
Project shift though. Like, I'm curious in terms of, I'm curious about if Weeksville, just anecdotally, I wasn't at either project, but from how I know people felt about them, Weeksville to me would seem more successful in terms of people's response to it, and I'm curious about people's response to Kara Walker. 160,000 people showed up, but were they changed, or were they just angry?
Take the selfies.
Well, I don't know. I didn't talk to them all.
No, I'm not saying what's the answer, but I'm just like posing that as like, how are you measuring success?
I appreciate that, and I can't answer. I mean, that's the kind of concerns I have, and also those numbers and that kind of spectacle of media does drive this to some degree. And also, all of us that got jobs, you got to make a splash. You can't just Because let's face it, a lot of this social engaged art stuff that really works is pretty boring.
Well, it's long term. The one that really works is 10 years or 5 years.
Yeah.
It's not spectacle that you come and see and you consume in a certain way. So, I mean, I have some failures, of course, like everyone else, but in this new position I have at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and I know it's a question you have. So the institution calls itself a citizen institution, and our mandate is to create culture that moves people. So what is I like this notion of a citizen institution. I really do like that. But then what that means is that everything I do, and I'm actually in charge not of the Engage programming, I'm in charge of making sure the exhibitions fit with that and are interesting. And it's exhibitions. People go into a gallery and see things and then they leave. And we don't have the capacity as a department right now to actually do proper social engagement and civic engagement projects. We simply don't have anyone else that has those characteristics, and if they do exist, they are in other departments. So if I am to do a project with a socially engaged artist that actually leaves the galleries, I am pretty sure we would fail right now. So the whole thing is I'm working like, in 3 years we will start to do some experiments in that, but we can't just do them tomorrow. It's not just a matter of hiring people. The institution doesn't have the skill set even to pose a question to an artist that the artist will answer in whatever way, and to offer the skill sets of the organization and the platform that is appropriate for that kind of thing. So the issue is, so right now I'm doing planning exhibitions that look at the history of social practice through specific artists, but I'm pretty sure that I'm still supposed to be doing work that engages citizenship. So I feel in a sense that I'm setting myself up to fail. So the question is how to unpack that in a way that is also neither as lofty in a certain way, but also it's not about it being kind of too abstract. It's about it also assuming that an arts institution can actually do that. So even though I believe in the mandate, I also want us to be very self-critical of how we address it, particularly because it also means us asking money from foundations on things that we haven't actually done. So we actually start with our citizen institution give us this.
But just to say, because I think it's such a good point about resources, because certainly in my experience, social engaged art, like in terms of staff, it's actually very resource heavy.
Oh, yeah.
And it costs a lot of money to do these projects properly, and also for we talk about time. Time and money are related.
It's the same.
Yeah. So it's just like, just to say, I think that in some ways institutions dip their toe into the social engaged art thing, but then they realize they've actually got to get staff on board. And then when they start getting a real clear picture of the real numbers, and you're not going to get giant media, it's just like, it just seems like it reads completely counter to what is the driving modality of most arts institutions. So, and I think it's important work, but it's good to just put that on the table.
And I think it's really interesting too, though, because that feel like we're operating in a capitalist model.
Yeah.
Because then we're trying to appeal to a foundation in the way that you would appeal for corporate sponsorship or whatever, and it's not actually about this process. Like the whole process has to be dismantled. But that's that's another conversation.
And there are foundations out there that are already changing their model,
Right, that's
but
true.
that would be the minority of them.
Sean, did you have anything before?
I always love when people talk about failure. I'm sitting here trying to think of stores that can compete with NATO's, and I can't. Like all of our failures working with artists have mostly been your most mundane, just ship-breaking. But what I actually think of the failures that really stick with me, I wouldn't even call them failures, but Bill Cromer, artist William Cromer, built a reproduction of Guantanamo Bay cell inside of one of our Eastern State Penitentiary cells, accurate right down to the copy of the Quran hanging from a surgical mask, which is how the U.S. Accommodated Islamic law that they can't set the Quran on the ground. This basically it's a dog kennel. It's a chain link fence dog kennel that we were keeping detainees in Guantanamo Bay, and they had their copies of the Quran hanging from the surgical masks. And when he first said he was going to do that, I was like, that is going to freak people out. Like this, it was like 2008 It's like, we're like, that's going to like blow up in our face, and we found advisors to tell us about it. Well, that was in 2004. The piece is still up. We keep saying we'll take it down when Guantanamo Bay is not something we should be talking about, so your grandkids can come see it apparently. But it's still there, the Quran is still there, still hanging from the sign says right there, copy the Holy Quran. Michelle Hamilton built a piece for us in 2008 called Beware the Lily Law, where she researched she was way ahead of all of us in this. She researched the challenges, the horrific experiences of trans people in the U.S. criminal justice system. In 2008, no one was talking about this, and so she wrote these scripts. She hired actors to play to read the scripts, to play these characters, and then she filmed them, and then they were projected on the back wall. You might see this, it's still on view actually. Projected on the back wall, and it is really graphic. It describes a rape, really clearly and graphically. And I thought, God, I'm going to lose my job, and the board's going to freak out, and visitors are going to freak out. And after a while, it's like, no one's ever complained. After a while, it's like, what does it take to piss these people off? It's like to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, like, the only thing worse than making programming that pisses people off is making programming that doesn't piss people off. Our new exhibit opens with a statement of mass incarceration isn't working. It took a lot to get our board of directors. Actually, they were good about it, but it really worked to try to lay the groundwork for that discussion about, we're just going to say it. We're going to say two things: that there are too many people in prison in the United States, and that there shouldn't be the disparity, the racial disparity in our prison population is not the natural order of things. There should not be, although it has been in the United States. Those patterns are remarkably unchanged, as they should be. The first person who ever was locked up in Eastern State was an African American. So we getting the board to sign off on that, and then we put up the thing, and then we protest with visitors, and you open the door, and you hold your breath, and everyone's like, walk past. So those are the moments where I really kind of feel like, I wouldn't call them failures, but it's more just that lack of, it's only worse than being ignored. It's like, so, yeah.
I have a question that I'll save for the end, but I'd like to open it up to the audience if you all have questions. Yeah. Oh yeah, I don't have.
Hi. So this is something that this is basically the topic of the entire thing, but I am a art history major and museum studies minor at Haverford and Bryn Mawr, and I'm from New York, and I'm here for the weekend, and I'm getting experiences at museums and galleries, and I'm kind of always asking myself the question of what I'm going to do with my art history degree, because I am so in love with art, and I love conceptual art and contemporary art, but to put it bluntly, I don't want to just cater to a bunch of rich people who buy art as an investment. So I am just asking for advice that's kind of personal, but also I think really relevant to all young people who really love art. I remember my mom once said that social change is a really weird phenomenon because young people have all the passion, but have none of the power. And I'm sure that's something that's been said a lot of times. So if you just have advice for young people who thrive in academia and love it, but don't want to get in this cycle of just catering to people who go to museum, like the upper middle class white population who tend to go to museums and see fancy art and that kind of thing.
Well, I do work in an art institution that has galleries, so I will say this. I will say that the first thing we have to do, all of us, is decolonize our minds. In other words, I too suffer from this thing of thinking the art world is only this one monolithic object. But in fact, there are many art worlds, and that's something that I discovered after my period in San Diego. It's not something I discovered, even though I was living in Tijuana. It's like a reminder that, in fact, one can create many different ways of not only making, but accessing. And it is our responsibility to truly open that up and make it visible. That's really part of what I do today. So one of the advantages I have as an immigrant is that I can go back and forth between cultures, and there is a whole movement in Latin America, a decolonizing movement, of recovering histories that haven't been told and putting them as part of a mainstream in a globalized world. In other words, there are many ways to skin a cat. There are many ways for you to do a practice, and that particular imaginary is something that is definitely here, even in this audience and in this group of people here, we can see that it's not actually the norm. It would be as if saying, and I know that I just said it before, I know that I just said before that I was working for that institution, but that was actually the fact in that institution. And my frustration was that I couldn't figure out how to shift that in that institution. But it would be as if actually believing all the silly things and lies that the Republicans and Trump are saying about this country. The good news is that that is not the United States. That is only one United States.
I would add to that too. So, one just kind of practical thing, how I transitioned from being a student of art to working in an art profession is I took everything that I disliked and disagreed with, and I started, volunteering, and then kind of in an organization that, I guess I didn't volunteer at RedLine first, I did get that job, but I volunteered at the organization that I didn't agree with, then I got the job, and then I, had a more like-minded value system with RedLine, although it was just kind of being built. And so what I recommend is, again, develop fluencies, as Lisa was talking about, and vocabularies of different arts worlds that exist out there, and try to, again, when spaces and doors open, move in them and disrupt that which you feel like is inequitable and unfair, and pour your energy towards making the change and disrupting the things that you have found, disturbing. I approached RedLine and my leadership at RedLine essentially as an anti-leader kind of model, because the first thing I did was respond to kind of the hierarchical bullshit I was dealing with at museums, where I saw the director not say hello to anyone that walked through the door unless they had money. And my entire approach was that I was going to say hello to every single person, follow people out the door, and I wasn't relating. So I was translating, I wasn't relating, and then I got to RedLine, and I made sure immediately to put all of those values in place that kind of, again, made it a more horizontal, where if people wanted to be leaders and make change, that I was going to step aside. And Michelle in the previous panel, I can't see where she is, but she was saying that what was so great about Erica is the ability to step aside. I think that's the first time I've been in a room where someone has actually described my style of leadership as a leadership. I'm not really related at all with kind of traditional leadership models, because I've always been more interested in stepping aside and either supporting an artist project or supporting a community or value system that I felt like I wasn't the expert in, but I, again, could use assets that I had, again, kind of referring to our keynote yesterday, to push in that direction. So, you're able to define your value through those experiences and then channel it towards what where you want to work, and what you want to do. Right here.
This is for Sean. When you were talking about the young man that, Sean,
Back here. Back there.
it's Theodore Harris.
I was going to say, it sounds like Theodore. Hold on.
When you were talking about the young man who now works for the Eastern State, who was formerly incarcerated, and the difficulty in asking him to relive that trauma, talking about being incarcerated, I think you may want to think about him being a consultant instead of just, it's one way to think about it, because he has that experience. Being a consultant there to talk about that may help. I'm not sure. But it's not a fully formed thought, but you may want to think about it.
I appreciate that. and I feel like I'm going to give you an answer that's going to come out sounding defensive. Maybe it is defensive. It feels a little weird. It's Lauren sitting right here, and she actually ran the program. So, but we had a whole series of consultants and advisors in our program. One of them's actually joined our board of directors. He is himself formerly incarcerated. So I feel like we do have a lot of consultants. What I was interested in, what Lauren was interested in, Lauren had a whole series of debates and disagreements on this project, but because the stakes were really high, both of you cared, and there were multiple ways of going about it. One of the things I kept saying was that we're doing this for our visitors. We want to make a safe environment, a healthy, psychologically safe environment for all of our employees, so this group, it's going to have different considerations to make sure that this group feels like they're in a safe space. But we're doing this for our visitors because the chance to shake hands with someone who's been in prison and have them tell you about their experience in prison is an experience that most Americans will never have. And so getting someone out on the front lines who's willing to do that work, but is it ethical to ask them to do it? And for that matter, is it ethical for our staff who has not been incarcerated? Because the issues around self-care and this, like, we're not social services agency, we're not used to thinking about these issues, but it's really emotionally draining and brings up all sorts of things for all of the staff, particularly people working very closely. There's 650,000 people a year coming out of prison in the United States. Most of those people will never talk about it to a stranger for very good reasons, because we remain a really in society. And so I agree that having consultants, I think we have a really good team of advisors around that, but the magic of the program was Lauren's insistence that we really get actual witnesses to what it's like to be incarcerated, to talk to our visitors. And I'm really proud of our new exhibit. I'm proud of all of our programming. There is nothing that we've ever done that is as powerful as letting our visitors just meet someone. They would cry, they would hug it was like this whole thing that would happen on those tours. But how do you scale it up? I mean, it's sort of like what Nato was saying about social justice work or social engaged art. It's just extremely time consuming and labor intensive. It's like a scientific study where we're not sure what the long-term effects of asking someone to do that are. So we're still doing the efforts of that. But I hear you. I'd love to talk more about it. Let's talk about it.
Hi. I have a question for you all. One, over here, right there. If you're looking for help. One of the things that you all sort of talked about is this idea that you were kind of like bucking your disciplines and training and sort of places of work in order to do something different. Sort of like an art historical training or a museum space that you've been working with previously, and sort of deciding that your practice involved engagement and sort of grappling with what that may mean. So I was just curious, since we're in an educational institution, and this becomes a real question in terms of like the field opening up and there's jobs for engagement folks and like what does that mean? Where do you all see like the right kind of or interesting training coming? Like where should training happen to be an engagement curator? Like should it come from schools? Should it come from experiences? Should it come from social justice fields? Like how do you all think like an interesting engagement like training comes from? Or should come from?
Being involved in communities, just showing up and showing up and showing up and showing up to as many community initiatives and organizing meetings that you care about, I feel like is great training for this field. And making time for those relationships, and that doesn't necessarily happen through academia, and it's not but I just don't think that what I have learned at RedLine or in kind of, sure, I have a degree in contemporary art and music, but no degree could have taught me the type of engagement strategies that I learned by just sitting and listening in a lot of community meetings about a lot of different issues that I was interested in and engaged with and trying to help as an active member.
Another thing too is like,
be kind of harsh. I don't know why I'm in that mood. It'd be nice. I just feel like certainly a background in social justice organizing is useful, but the art part is also so key. You know, there's so much bad art stuff out there, and I mean that in a way that's like it's weird. You know, I mean, I think grad schools are good places to learn. I like schools. I like classes. You raise kids to read books. But I often find as much as I can be kind of snarky about the Bard Curatorial Studies program, the thing I like about it is they do keep up with art around the world. And it's useful. Like those kids that go through that program learn a lot about the world of art. And just to say, with the decolonizing art thing, I mean, I think that the kind of the remit or the canon certainly could use some rethinking. But I also think these grad programs need to really be rigorous in getting young curators' head around what kind of art is out there, what kind of aesthetic discourses, what kind of stuff's exciting. Because it's not just to say, if you just do the activist thing, it's all good, but you're going to make some activist projects that don't look very arty. And I don't mind that. I like that the world's like that. But I wouldn't call you an art person, you know? And I think some of this stuff suffers from a lack of creative visual sophistication that's also the juice, the power that makes this stuff really work well. So I think it's a mix, and honestly, it's a tall order because that's a lot for faculty to get their heads around. You know, that's just a lot of things to keep track of, and I don't think there's a lot of people that have got that in their bag. So it's a tough thing for grad programs, but I would love. And I know Daniel's doing good stuff here, but I think honestly, our field could use a lot of work.
I was going to say social justice organizing, and then Nato beat me to it.
Thank you. This is kind of a follow-on to that question. A number of you raised the issue of working with various boards or not being able to work in a particular institution, deciding to meet. How do you see the kind of power of institutional boards and whether it's a better thing to sort of work with in that structure or to work against it? I guess maybe the question is how should board members at important arts institutions be educated?
There's no working against. I mean, I can't speak for everyone else. We had a complete change in our board, but it was ugly, and it took a long time. I'm assuming most people here, a lot of people here work for nonprofits. I still find it the most baffling part of what we do and the most challenging. And you spend all your time educating them. Our previous board, I'd spend all this time trying to educate them and they'd still give shitty advice. And then you have to figure out a way to tell them that their advice, or pretend you're following their advice when you're not. We currently have, I've heard, you know what you never hear nonprofit people say how much they respect their boards and how much they love working for them? Because they don't, it's so and we're in a really rare moment at Eastern State right now where
Is there anyone else that wants to commit career suicide? Please take a turn.
Didn't realize if you're watching this. I feel like I'm turning red. All by way of saying that with a lot of work, my boss, Salio, and I spent a long time thinking very carefully about how to get different board members on, and there was a tipping point when all of a sudden the majority of the people in the room were really reasonable and referred to others' expertise. But it took 5 years, and it was really scary. It was really bad. So I see both sides here. And there's no working against it though. It's hardwired in. Maybe someone else has found a way to work against it, but I feel like that's who they are. It's like
I don't actually work that much directly with the board. I'm very, very lucky right now that my boss, Deborah Cullinan, is the director of the entire organization, which has not only visual arts, but performance and civic engagement and other departments. And the board has actually been very welcoming of her ideas. She is the person who has designed this notion of a citizen institution and so on. I think that the challenge in San Francisco in relation to boards is actually slightly different in that we have across the street the really newly reopened SF MoMA, which has a very, very powerful board that actually has dictated and essentially defines how the institution is profiling itself right now. One of the board members, the Fishers have actually inhabited 3 of the floors, etc. It's a different model.
And they own Gap.
They own Gap and half of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so it's a model that is kind of troubling a little bit in the field because it gives boards now a very public position in how this culture is described and defined in the United States. Again, when you see it in comparison to European models or Mexico, which has a very different, it has actually public funding. So what I would say is that, aside from all the other ills that are generated by government in this country and others, the fact that there is no public funding in the US, NEA gives so little money, it's a major problem, I would say. I think it is a major, it's something that has to be resolved, because what happens is that everything then positions and sort of points to privatization of culture. And so it becomes in a very hot market like we have right now, everything is kind of out of whack.
Oh my God, I'm with you. What's Hillary's position on the arts? Does anybody know? She like it? We don't even know. Hey, but I just real quick on the board thing. An interesting phenomena that is worth bearing in mind is that the arts do depend on their critical reception. And a funny thing has happened, I'm talking to some people that have been in the art world a lot longer than me, is that the art fairs increasingly have nothing to do with where the discourse is at. And that wasn't always the case, just to say. Often the commodity, luxury, speculative art world was very much in cahoots with the art historians that everyone was, like Cindy Sherman. It was like Hal Foster's weighing on Cindy Sherman, and it's a lot of money. Robert Goldberg. And then you'd have these kind of Richter, whatever we go on, Polka, all German painters. But what's interesting is that space is changing radically. And I say that because, this kind of grip that the luxury commodity thing is, that is a lot of museums. The collectors are the board and really want their values reflected in their institutions. That said, they also deeply don't want to be called out for having a bad collection. So they feel this, just to say the conversation social media is having an effect on the institutions, because people know that that's where the discourse is at, but that's so not reflected in the stuff in their living rooms. Right. And so I just think there's an interesting historic moment we're in where the discourse is not where the luxury commodity art world's at right now. That might shift. But I do think, just to say, I think it's important to bear in mind the power of owning the discourse and putting forth the conversation on social justice, because it is having an effect. And I completely agree about the public funding thing. It is absolutely essential. A lot of institutions in our cities across America, you should just go like this. You walk in, you go, corrupt.
I'm going to interrupt because we have room for one more question. And I feel like this far side hasn't gotten representation, so we'll take it from here. This will be last.
2 questions.
One question.
Hi, so I am an emerging artist, and I actually have a show out here this weekend, and I'm talking about actually initiating engagement with the communities. So I myself went to the Carl Walker exhibition, and what you're talking about as far as success, the sensationalism behind it, and seeing people make, some people are motorboating the press and taking away from the essence of what the artist is trying to do, which kind of devalues the work. So what is your advice, especially for emerging artists to engage the community, but also not to take away from the work. Because I find myself teetering on how popular do I want to be, because I have a message that I want to convey.
Well, it's an important question for you to wrestle with, because I think so many different artists have different answers to that, you know? So, and I think it's an important tension. You know, Kara, who I think is an incredible artist, was really ready to stir that pot. I mean, she set up a trap. You know, that was a big trap she made. And then she wanted the public to just be in a big mess together. She purposely did that, you know? And that's why it's this sphinx that just stands without speaking, kind of staring at you like, look at the mess this is, you know? But I think like that's a strategy that she is really good at, is to kind of let the work really defiantly stare back at you. Whereas some social engaged artists really want the space of the public to be much more, like that the public has more agency. You know, and I think for you, it's almost experimentation and trying things out and going with what feels right and then honing in on it. Because I think there's a lot of techniques, and I don't, you know, it's just a question of which one you're attracted to. And then being really tough on yourself about, you know, what you want out of something, you know what I'm saying?
I don't mind stirring it up.
You guys should all come. I got flyers. I don't mind stirring it up. That's my intention. To stir it up.
Yeah, all right. Where's your show?
It's at the Asian Arts Institute with the Philadelphia Playwrights. So socially charged, and I'm ready to stir it up.
All right, cool.
So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to make a closing comment, and then also if you have any, your closing comment could include reactions to the entire symposium, especially around ethics and intention, or just whatever your reactions are. And then also if you have a statement or an announcement at all about something coming up or just things you want the audience to know. So each of you has a minute.
You know, I think I just want to take the minute to say thank you to Mural College and Mural Arts for letting me be here and taking, you know, I've just done a lot of amazing listening to a lot of obviously great content that has just filled my notebook, and to, you know, Michael Rakowitz and Risa, our two keynotes were fantastic, and just all the conversations has been so great. And you know, just as a quick reflection, you know, I guess I think I've always seen art's unique ability to show up wherever it needs to be and to do things differently when other structures are falling down. And I'm blindly hopeful that, you know, as Michael's keynote so beautifully kind of put it, you know, giving voice to the voiceless and having those who are hearing and heard being the first to hear what's going on. I just always feel like art has that ability, and you know, I also have these existential crises all the time about its efficacy, but I feel like, you know, truly art can assume any space, and it's why I'm in the work. And because you kind of don't know where it's going to show up, but it can show up anywhere. It doesn't ask for permission. And there are so many brilliant artists that, you know, show up in all those spaces constantly. And I think, you know, I think there's a whole lot of change that has occurred. I think it's why it's more relevant now in discourses around art, and has done a lot to change the visibility. And, you know, art, I feel like, has put a lot of social agendas on the table. And I think that's kind of the work and the efficacy that we can see, which is what keeps me getting up and not, you know, running away and, you know, hiding from the work. So yeah, and I think that I have really been inspired by this conference, and I am leaving with a bunch of tools that I feel like I can further, again, share assets that I had to help create spaces for change and dialogue that hasn't been happening, that needs to happen for my community and hopefully life. So, thank you.
48 hours.
Oh yeah. Also, if anyone's in Denver, thank you, Katiana, August 10th and 11th. RedLine has a program called 48 Hours of Socially Engaged Art and Conversation, and it is really about collaboration. I love the notion or the idea that I will certainly push of, the work that we do is collaboration, not charity. And we partner with over 20 organizations to kind of pool the collective intelligence around the issues of equity and social responsibility. And we hear from human service providers, artists, activists. We do put the quality of the work at its face. And of course, I agree with Nato on that it's not just community organizing, it's also the Right Artist Project that really kind of ties it all and can say it the loudest. So yeah, it's 48 hours straight, and it's on August 5th.
Man, it's hard to follow you guys these days. I wasn't quite sure what to expect coming here this weekend, honestly. I don't consider myself a curator. I occasionally have felt like a fish out of water here. I really want to thank Moore and Mural Arts, and especially Daniel and Paul, for inviting some people who aren't in the middle of these conversations, but are more towards the periphery, like myself. So thank you for including me and Eastern State in all of this stuff. Among the refreshing things, though, I thought both our keynote speakers were excellent and informal, and I told Lisa yesterday that it was like the first time ever that I wish the speaker had a PowerPoint, just because her presentations were so rich. I couldn't take notes fast enough. So I love being invited here, and it's funny because I think about this kind of work, how it could spread into other organizations, other institutions that don't consider themselves explicitly art organizations, that don't have positions like curators. And I'll keep that work up if you will. But I think finding the language to keep it approachable and keep it conversational. Like Michael's wonderful presentation this morning was funny and poignant and not filled with jargon, but filled with human stories and wonderful visuals, and it's really great. I think you've had a lot of chances to see Eastern State Penitentiary. I'm happy to give you passes if you want to come back while you're in town or if you live here. The real pitch I want to make, though, is for our arts program. We have a rolling deadline. It's in June every year, where we accept an open call for visual artists. Maximum funding is $15,000. I never know how to say this stuff, so I'm just saying it. We don't know the race of the people who apply. We have not had a person of color exhibiting at a place one. So that is something that I don't know what's happening, but I feel like we're struggling to get some groups of artists aware of our programming. So if you can help us spread the word, I would really appreciate it. The next deadline won't be until next June, but it's every year, and we are not doing as good a job as we could be doing to get the word out about that program.
Well, thank you. It has been really rich, and also it has been for me, it hasn't answered one question I have, and maybe you can help me now, or we can continue the discussion afterwards. I have a question about the notion of efficacy. I know I don't disagree with having ways to measure the efficacy of our projects in social engagement. I don't disagree that they should be useful, but I wonder if it's become a kind of trope that, and a kind of red herring in a certain way. I wonder if we keep talking about artistic projects in that way, do we start now to really move too far into the social sciences? And this is, I've always been convinced that we can only say what we do. In other words, that we can't make these big statements, or that metaphor and symbolism aren't enough. I have actually believed that and practiced that, but for some reason recently I've started to question that, because it has become such a trope of social practice, and because oftentimes, even in the social arena, in politics, advance is so fragile. I remember when I was doing research in Medellin on the policy change that Sergio Fajardo and his administration brought to the city. This is a city that had been under the grip of narco politics for 20 years, and this one administration really shifted everything, including culture, built 123 schools for elementary schools, built 13 art centers, etc. I came twice. I came at sort of at the 2006, right at the end of that period, when the mayor was still the mayor, and then I came 5 years later, and the new administration had taken back a lot of the advancements, and people that several people said, well, all of these advancements are so fragile. So when we talk about these projects and place so much emphasis on efficacy, on usefulness, on quantifiable measurements, do we leave less space for this kind of area, this kind of the space of poetry and the space of emotional and psychological shift that projects like Michael's projects was doing today? Can we measure what that does? What a project like his long-term project as an artist, but any specific project within that, can we actually measure that? We can't. So I want us to still remember that we are in this field, in the art field, for a reason.
Great. I really appreciate that, and I want to thank Haverford College of Art and Mural Arts and Philly. You know, this conversation is so great, just because, you know, I really appreciate the depth and the questions that are being raised, just because almost sometimes I think you measure progress by what is already being assumed, and a lot's being assumed that wasn't assumed before. Like no one's saying, is that art? Which, you know, 3 years ago, you just like, oh my God, here it goes again. But, so there's that. And I'm so into this city, just to give a shout out again to this city, but I feel like this city could use some work in these conversations, and this is so great to have this happening here. There's so much possibility in this city, and there's so much economic and racial inequity in this city that I feel like this is a real important place for these kind of conversations to not only be discussed, but also practice, put in place. So it's great. I'm going to become an UNTUS member right away. That video sold me, and put my $20 a month in. They are my neighbors. And the other thing, I also just like to say that as a pitch, I got the Creative Time Summit coming to DC during the exciting election season. And we've got some really amazing speakers, including Ian Mackay, and Alicia Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and Carrie Mae Weems, and Hans Ulrich Obrist. And something about having Hans Ulrich Obrist and Alicia Garza in the same conference is very special. It's also trying to take advantage of the fact that we live in the most politically terrifying times, and also is poetically the 100th anniversary of Dada. And that anniversary couldn't happen in a more germane period in American history. So I hope you guys come out and check that out. That'll be a lot of fun. But it's a very different kind of conference, obviously, for those of you that know it, than this. And I really appreciate this kind of space of deep reflection and thoughts and self-reflection. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Being here, sticking with us through hot temperatures yesterday, cooler ones in here today. Especially thank you to our final panel and our moderator, Maori Holmes, who are bringing this all together quite beautifully. This is a full dialogue, and this is an unfinished dialogue as well. I know there's still a lot of conversations. So we want to keep building with you, and we also want to have some space to exhale, reflect, and gather together. And there's going to be a chance for that now with a reception in the lobby. And for those of you who want to stay around in this room, there's also the full film program running on a loop for an hour and then an hour again. I want to make sure also to echo and continue echoing how grateful Daniel Tucker and I are to all of you, to all of the participants, to all of the graduate students who introduced all of the speakers, to site visit partners around the city, to our volunteers, our tech staff, our interns, thoughtful and generous funders who wanted to see this happen, including Ford, Hemera, and Knight, and of course our host organizations, Mural Arts and more, for bringing this symposium together now for the second year. As we gather together, all of those folks and more, we think of you as a cohort of this year, having these conversations. And we're really thrilled that many of the people in this year's cohort were here last year as well. And we're really hoping as we try to evolve and as we listen and hear feedback from you that next year's cohort will also include many of you. We did have a great portion of folks online on the live stream. So there are others outside of this room, maybe also on the Juntos Wave out there. So we're hoping that the conversation grows in terms of also balancing the questions that we're asking ourselves and also the pathways, the challenges, the epiphanies, and the next steps. As we leave this room, if you happen to have one of the BabelBox radios that just fit nicely next to you and you still have it, we'll be able to collect it in the back. It will go toward great simultaneous interpretation later. And for those of you who are going to join us tomorrow outside, you can still join us for the Schuylkill Center hike, and you can see Daniel about that. Folks, it's been great. Thank you. See you in the lobby.